A lone flame flickers against an endless white sky. This is the final stand of the Firekin, a people whose magic is dying in their veins. Their last chieftain, Kalin, climbs the great frost spire, not in triumph, but in desperation. He ignites a ceremonial fire, a signal to his scattered tribe that the old ways must awaken once more. But this single act of defiance summons the attention of the Everwinter itself, a sentient cold that seeks to snuff out their lineage forever. By the end of this journey, you will witness how one man's quest to reclaim a lost legend reshapes the very fate of the North. I wonder, wherever you are listening right now, what time it is for you there. The world feels a little quieter in these moments, doesn't it? We will uncover why his inner fire is fading and what ancient secrets lie buried beneath the ice, waiting for a spark. What does it truly take for a legacy to survive when everything conspires to erase it? Kaelin's single flame was a declaration of war against the silence. But declarations are not enough to fill empty hearts, so he turned his back on the worried eyes of his people and walked into the teeth of the wind. His destination was a story, the Ember-Tree, a legend whispered to grow where the first spark of creation fell to earth. Its sap was said to be liquid sunlight, its leaves like captured embers, a single touch enough to reignite a fading soul. To the elders huddled around their dying fires, this quest was madness. They saw a chieftain chasing a dream while the world froze solid around them. Their fear curdled into dissent, muttered arguments about pragmatism and survival echoing in the longhouse he left behind. But Kaelen knew survival was the very reason he had to go. Mere existence was a slow death. They needed a miracle. The wilds did not care for his title or his desperation. The cold here was a physical force, a biting wind that stole his breath and made each step a battle. He felt his own inner fire, the birthright of his kin, sputter like a candle in a storm. With every gust, a little more of its warmth was leached away, and the gnawing doubt grew louder. Was this all a final, grand delusion? Was he leading his people to their end with a fairy tale? Yet his decision to come alone now felt like his only act of true leadership. He would not gamble another life on this hope. His own would be the only one lost if he failed, and failure was a specter that walked beside him. It was more than just his death out here in the white nothing. It was the final proof. If the last chieftain's fire could be extinguished so easily, then the Everwinter was right. The Firekin were already a memory, their magic just a dying echo. This was not a simple journey. It was a test of their very essence. As he pushed deeper into the expanse, the wind began to play a strange, melodic tune against the ice spires. And cutting through that haunting song came a distant, resonant howl, a sound that promised he was not the only hunter in these frozen wastes. The howl was swallowed by the wind, but the fear it seeded remained. Kaelen pushed forward, his senses frayed, until his boot struck not soft snow, but something unyielding and smooth. He dropped to his knees, scraping away the ice with numb hands. A dark, polished stone emerged, covered in intricate carvings that spiraled into shapes of flame and branching trees. These were the Sentinel stones, monuments mentioned only in the oldest songs. His breath caught. They were real. Driven by a compulsion he did not understand, he pressed his bare palm against the frozen rune. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then a deep, resonant warmth bloomed from within the stone, a gentle golden light seeping into the grooves of the ancient script. It was not the fierce heat of his own magic, but something older, more profound, like sunlight remembered by the earth itself. This faint glow was an answer, a confirmation that shook the very foundations of his despair. The legends were not just stories, they were a history waiting to be read. That fragile hope was immediately challenged by the sky. The wind, once a constant moan, sharpened into a shrieking gale, and the air filled with a blinding, furious white. The blizzard descended with a vengeance, as if the land itself were punishing him for his discovery. Snow and ice lashed at his face, and he watched in horror as the monolith began to vanish under a fresh, thick layer. He had found a signpost to salvation, only for the path to be erased before his eyes. He had a choice, a brutal one. He could seek shelter and preserve his own life, letting the stones be lost once more, perhaps forever. Or he could use the last dregs of his strength to save the knowledge. His fingers, stiff and burning with cold, fumbled for the piece of treated hide he used as a map and a shard of flint from his pouch. Ignoring the screaming instinct to find cover, he began to scrape, tracing the glowing patterns onto his map. Each line was a battle against the storm, each symbol a piece of his own waning heat, traded for a chance at a future. As he worked, a new dread took root. The ground beneath his feet seemed to shift and groan. A crevasse he was certain hadn't been there moments before now yawned just a few paces away. The ice was not a passive landscape. It was alive, sentient, and hostile, actively reshaping itself to trap him. The Everwinter was not merely a force of nature. It was a watchful guardian, and he had trespassed in its most sacred vault. The final rune was copied just as the snow swallowed the last flicker of light from the stone. He shoved the precious map inside his tunic, his body trembling with exhaustion and cold. There was no shelter to be found now, only the white, roaring fury of the storm. He curled against the buried monolith, using its solid presence as a windbreak, and waited for the end. But the storm's rage, like a held breath, could not last forever. After an eternity of howling wind, a sudden, profound silence fell. The blizzard was gone. Kaelen raised his head, blinking in the stark, calm light. A path of wind-scoured ice stretched out before him, leading toward a distant, dark ridge, and standing upon that path, between him and his destination, was a massive, lupine shape of pure, shimmering ice, its crystalline eyes fixed upon him with a terrible, silent intelligence. The creature of living ice did not roar. It moved with a silence more terrifying than any sound, its crystalline form shifting with the grinding of ancient glaciers. Kaelin's own fire magic was a pathetic flicker before this embodiment of the deep cold. A direct fight was not just hopeless, it was suicide. The first swing of its massive, frozen fist missed him by a breath, but the wave of absolute cold that followed it stole the warmth from his lungs. He felt the heat in his veins diminish, a tangible loss, as if his very life force was being siphoned away with each near miss. He was not just dodging physical blows, he was dodging the end of his bloodline. His mind raced, discarding one desperate plan after another. He could not fight the cold with more cold. He needed an opposite, a disruption. A memory surfaced, an elder's tale of the land's hidden fires, of thin crusts of ice hiding vents that breathed the earth's warm breath. He had noticed a faint shimmer in the air just ahead, a patch where the snow seemed thinner. It was a gamble with the highest stakes. He feigned a stumble, letting the golem close the distance, its icy presence making the air crackle. He backed toward the shimmering spot, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. As the sentinel lunged for a final, crushing blow, Kaelen threw himself sideways. The creature's immense weight landed directly on the fragile ice. The world erupted in a violent hiss. A geyser of superheated steam burst forth, engulfing the icy guardian in a cloud of scalding vapor. The thing did not scream, but it shuddered violently, its precise, crystalline form fogging and fracturing under the sudden thermal shock. It staggered, blinded and disoriented, its connection to the hostile intelligence of the Everwinter momentarily severed. Kaelen did not wait. He scrambled away, his body trembling not from exertion, but from the profound drain of his remaining inner heat. He had proven his worthiness not through brute force, but through cleverness and a respect for the land's own balance. But the victory felt hollow. He collapsed against a wind-scoured rock, his limbs heavy as stone, his core so cold he could barely feel his own fingers. Before him, the path was clear. The fallen sentinel lay still, already beginning to fuse back with the landscape, and beyond it, the land dipped into a sheltered basin. There, beneath a perpetual twilight, stood a grove of trees with bark like coal and leaves that glowed with a soft, internal amber light. The Ember-Tree grove awaited. Yet the silence that hung over it was not peaceful. It was the deep, watchful quiet of a place that had been waiting for an age, a silence that had forgotten the sound of a heartbeat. The air in the grove was a living warmth, a stark contrast to the killing cold just beyond its borders. Kaelen stepped forward, his boots sinking into soft, dark soil. Above him, the ember trees hummed with a low, resonant frequency, their glowing leaves casting shifting patterns of amber light. The sound was not a song, but a vibration, the very echo of stored sunlight given voice. He moved toward the center of the grove, where the eldest tree stood, its trunk wider than a longhouse, and its roots like great, coiled serpents, breaking the earth. This was the heart of the legend, the source of the Firekin's power. He reached out a trembling hand, not to take, but to ask. The moment his fingers brushed the ancient, coal-like bark, the world dissolved into fire and memory. He was no longer himself, but a vessel for the grove's long history. He saw his ancestors, chieftains of old, their inner fires blazing like forges. He witnessed their triumphs, but also their fatal pride. He saw a chieftain who tried to command the grove, to wrest its power by force, his spirit consumed by the very memories he sought to master, leaving nothing but a scorched outline on the ground. He saw another who came in greed, attempting to take a seed without an offering, his own life force drained in an instant, leaving him a frozen husk. The grove was not a resource to be plundered. It was a partner, a living record that demanded respect. The peace of this place was a test, a siren song for the arrogant and the impatient. To rush was to be lost forever. Kaelen understood the choice before him. He could not demand the grove's power. He had to prove he was worthy of its trust. He withdrew his hand from the trunk, the visions receding like a tide of embers. Drawing his ritual knife, He did not look to the branches for a prize. Instead, he knelt before the massive, gnarled roots. He pressed the blade into his own palm, a sharp, clean pain. A single drop of his blood, dark and shimmering with the last of his lineage's magic, fell onto the root. It was not a spell or a command. It was a sacrifice, an offering of his own essence, a sign that he came not as a master, but as a supplicant hoping to reforge a broken bond. The earth trembled. The great root absorbed the offering, the dark bark glowing where the blood had fallen. A deep, approving hum resonated through the grove, a sound of ancient recognition. From a high branch, a single seed, no larger than his thumb, detached and drifted down. It did not fall, but floated, a perfect sphere of captured ember, pulsing with a soft inner light. He cupped it in his hands, and a profound warmth, gentle yet immense, flowed into him. It was the warmth of 1,000 summers, the memory of the first dawn. Yet as this new fire entered him, it did not replenish his own. Instead, it highlighted his profound emptiness. The last of his personal magic, the spark that had sustained him through the wilds, flickered and guttered out, spent in the act of receiving this greater gift. He felt weaker than ever, a hollow man now carrying a sun. He clutched the seed to his chest, its warmth a beacon in the sudden chill of his own exhaustion. He had what he came for. He had to return to his people, to plant this hope in the heart of their despair. But as he turned to leave the sheltered basin, he saw them. At the edge of the grove's light, where the warmth gave way to the encroaching frost, shadows shifted. Sleek, low forms with eyes like chips of glacial blue ice watched him from the twilight. The grove's resurgence of heat had not gone unnoticed. It had drawn the predators of the deep cold, creatures that fed on warmth and magic. His journey home would not be a retreat. It would be a race, and he was now the most hunted thing in the north. The frost tracker moved with a predator's patience, a ghost in the periphery of his vision. Kaelen could feel the heat of the ember seed against his chest, a blazing beacon in the frozen waste, and he knew the creature was drawn to it like a moth to a flame. Every time he glanced back, he saw only a ripple in the snow, a flicker of white fur against white ground. It was a hunter perfectly adapted to this environment, and he was a stumbling man carrying its favorite meal. His attempts to mislead it were useless. He would double back, wade through freezing streams to break his scent, and even climb a precarious ledge to lay a false trail. Each time, within minutes, the subtle signs of its presence returned. The soft crunch of snow in the distance, the faint, cold puff of its breath, crystallizing in the air. It was not just following him, it was studying him, waiting for his strength to fail. His own energy was a dwindling resource. The last of his personal fire was gone, spent in the grove, and now he was running on sheer will alone. His body felt heavy and numb, his reactions slowed by a deep, bone-chilling fatigue. He was easy prey, and both he and the hunter knew it. The seed's warmth was a comfort, but it was also a curse, marking him for death with every step he took toward home. He could not outrun this thing. He could not outfight it. His only remaining option was to outthink it. The idea was a desperate gamble, to use the one thing he was protecting as a lure felt like a betrayal of his entire quest. But if he did nothing, the frost tracker would take the seed from his cold, dead hands anyway. He made his decision on the edge of a narrow ice canyon, a deep crack in the earth where the walls gleamed like blue glass. It was a treacherous place, but its confines were the key. The frost tracker was large, powerful, and built for the open expanse. In that tight space, its size would become its greatest weakness. With a final, steadying breath, Kaelen untied the small leather pouch from his neck, letting the seed's warm glow spill out. He held it aloft for a moment, a brilliant, pulsating ember in the flat gray light. He saw the frost tracker freeze, its glacial blue eyes locking onto the prize. Then he turned and ran, not away from the canyon, but directly into its narrow throat. The beast took the bait without hesitation, its pursuit turning into a furious charge. The ground shook as it plunged into the canyon after him. The plan worked, but too well. The creature was faster than he had anticipated, its claws screeching against the ice as it closed the distance. Kaelen pushed his failing body to its limit, the walls of the canyon so close he could touch them on either side. He heard the beast's roar of frustration as it squeezed through a particularly tight passage, its momentum momentarily checked. That was the chance he needed. Just ahead, he spotted a fissure in the canyon wall, a narrow crack, barely wide enough for a man to slip through. He dove into it, scraping his shoulders as he forced his way into the darkness, clutching the seed tightly to his chest. He emerged on the other side into a blinding snowfield, the frost tracker's enraged roars echoing from within the ice canyon, trapped by the very geography he had used against it. He had escaped. The seed was safe, but as he stumbled away from the canyon, the sounds of its fury followed him, a stark reminder. He had not just survived a single hunt. He had stirred the hornet's nest. The wilds were now fully awake, and they knew what he carried. Every shadow in the snow from this point forward would feel like a pair of watching eyes. The familiar sight of his village's smoke holes, now barely puffing gray wisps into the sky, should have been a relief. But the air was thick with a different kind of chill, one born of argument and fear. Kaelen pushed open the great longhouse door to a scene of fractured unity. The Elder Council was not huddled around the central fire for warmth, but standing in a tense circle, their voices sharp and overlapping. The word sanctuary was on every tongue, a whispered promise of green valleys far to the south, a place where the cold could not reach. His return, gaunt and frost-rimed, silenced them. All eyes fell to the gentle, pulsing light emanating from within his tunic. He produced the ember seed, and its warmth washed over the room, a tangible, undeniable truth. For a moment, hope flickered in the weary faces. Then Elder Torvin, his face a roadmap of deep-set lines and deeper skepticism, spoke. You led us to believe you sought a solution, not a storybook trinket. While you chased ghosts, 3 more of our hearths went cold. We cannot eat legend, Kaelen. The accusation hung in the air, solid as ice. The council was dividing before him, some staring at the seed with desperate longing, others with bitter resentment. The old ways, he realized, were not just fading from memory, they were being actively abandoned. Kaelen's voice, though weary, did not waver. He met Torvin's gaze. This is not a trinket, it is a covenant, and I will plant it here, in the soil of our ancestors, where the first Firekin kindled their flames. I will do this with your blessing, or without it. The declaration was a spark thrown onto tinder. To plant it was to chain them to this dying land, The Traditionalists argued to leave was to sever their last connection to the source of their very identity. The Progressives countered. The Firekin stood on a precipice, their survival hinging not on a single monster, but on a choice that could tear their tribe in two. Kalin turned his back on the debate and walked to the village center, a patch of earth kept clear of snow by ritual and memory. He fell to his knees, his numb fingers beginning to dig into the frozen ground. This act was no longer just about salvation. It was an act of rebellion against the slow surrender of his own people. As he carved a small hollow in the sacred soil, the longhouse door flew open with a crash. A young scout, her face pale and breath coming in ragged gasps, staggered into the center of the conflict. The argument died instantly. She pointed a trembling finger back the way she had come, toward the shifting wall of white on the horizon. "It is not just the cold that comes," she gasped. "The ice itself is moving. It walks." The scout's report was not of a storm, but of a moving mountain. The ice heart, a sentient glacier, was grinding its way toward them with a deliberate, terrible purpose. Panic, a colder and more immediate fear than the long dread of the freeze, erupted through the village. The debate over sanctuary was over. Now it was a frantic scramble for survival. Voices rose in a chaotic chorus, shouting about the fastest route south, about what they could carry, about the futility of Kaelin's tiny seed against an advancing wall of ancient ice. The Ember-Tree, a promise of future warmth, felt like a pathetic answer to a present and crushing doom. Kalin climbed onto a pile of firewood, his voice cutting through the fear. He did not shout. He spoke with a conviction that felt like the last ember in a dark world. "We cannot outrun the winter itself. Our flight would only prove we are already defeated. Our only hope, our only true weapon, is the fire we were born to wield." He was not just asking them to stand and fight. He was asking them to believe that their fading magic could hold back a continent of ice. The choice was no longer between tradition and progress, but between a meaningful end and a meaningless one. He gave his orders, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. The children, the elderly, anyone without the spark of active magic, were to be taken to the high caves, the stone throat caverns, where the deep earth might shield them from the glacier's breath. It was a desperate gamble, a hope that the mountain itself would be their sanctuary. Every other soul, every man and woman who could still summon even a flicker of flame, would stand with him. They would meet the ice heart on the plain, not to destroy it, for that was impossible, but to stall it, to buy a single day, an hour, a few precious moments for the seed in their sacred soil to awaken. The glacier's approach was a physical weight on the air. The very temperature plummeted, and a deep, groaning thunder echoed from the north, the sound of the land itself being pulverized. It was not merely ice. It was a manifestation of the Everwinter's conscious will, a force that had decided the Firekin's time was over. As the last of the vulnerable were hurried away, Kaelen looked at the grim, determined faces of those who remained. They were not a grand army. They were cooks, hunters, weavers, and herders, their inner fires weak and guttering. He led this small, desperate war party out from the village, away from the planted seed, and toward the roaring sound of their own extinction. They marched to trade their lives for a sliver of time, a final, defiant prayer offered not to the gods, but to a seed sleeping beneath the frozen ground. The wall of flame they wove together was a tapestry of desperation. Every last ember of their fading magic was poured into that single, roaring barrier. For a breathtaking moment, it worked. The leading edge of the ice heart groaned, its ancient face streaming with meltwater that froze again into glittering curtains of ice. A ragged cheer went up from the warriors. They were holding it, but the glacier was not just ice. It was a mind. They watched in horror as the surface of the ice began to change, shifting and reorganizing into vast, faceted panels of perfect crystal. These shields did not just withstand the heat, they turned it back on them. A blast of their own fire, reflected and intensified, seared back across the plain. Screams of shock and pain replaced the cheers as several Firekin fell, scorched by the very power they had summoned. Their greatest weapon had been turned against them in an instant. The wall of flame guttered and died, not from lack of fuel, but from the crushing blow to their spirit. The glacier's advance resumed, slower now, more deliberate, as if it were savoring their despair. The thunder of cracking ice was the only sound that mattered. Morale shattered like thin glass. They had given everything they had, and it had only made the enemy stronger. Kaelin's voice cut through the din, not with anger, but with grim clarity. Fall back. Now, it was not a cry of defeat, but an order of preservation. He looked at the wounded, at the terrified faces of his people, and knew that another direct assault would be their extinction. Brute force was a language the Ice Heart spoke fluently, and they were barely whispering. As they retreated to the relative shelter of the village's outer palisades, the cold seemed to mock their failure. Kaelin's mind was a frantic scroll, unspooling every fireside tale, every elder's lesson, every fragment of lore he had ever learned. There had to be something more, a piece of forgotten wisdom. The old stories spoke of the Everwinter not as an invincible force, but as a power with a nature, a rhythm, a weakness born of its own essence. What was the one thing a sentient, all-consuming cold could not comprehend? The answer was not in a memory of fire, but in a whisper of silence. Kaelin's mind seized on a half-forgotten name from the oldest tales. The sun whispers. They were said to dwell in the highest peaks, where the light never faded, beings who wove sunlight itself into solid form. It was a desperate, almost laughable hope. The Firekin had not spoken to the sun whispers in generations. Their ancient rivalry over the domains of heat and light, leaving a legacy of bitter silence. To ask for their help now was to beg from a neighbor you had feuded with for a lifetime. Yet the Ice Heart had proven immune to their raw, untamed fire. It needed a different kind of warmth, a purer light. This was no longer a battle of strength, but of essence. He gathered the weary council and laid out his insane gamble. He would go to the sun-touched spires and seek an alliance. The council's faces were a mixture of horror and resignation. To leave them now, with the glacier's thunder growing louder by the hour, felt like abandonment. Elder Torvin's voice was cold. You would gamble our last defense on a myth and a memory of old grievances. You take our only symbol of hope with you. If you fail utterly. Kaelen met his gaze, the ember seed a heavy warmth against his skin. I leave you my trust. Hold the line, buy me time. He appointed a steadfast young warrior named Alara to lead the defenses in his absence. A decision that sent murmurs through the longhouse. She was capable, but untested in a crisis of this magnitude. Then he turned and walked away from his people once more, carrying their fate in his hands and the weight of their doubt on his shoulders. The journey to the sun-touched peaks was a climb into a different world. The killing cold of the lowlands gave way to a sharp, thin air that was still frigid, but pierced by a brilliant, unfiltered sun. The light here was a physical presence, so bright it hurt to look at the snow. He felt like an intruder in a realm of pure illumination, a creature of fading embers, stumbling into a kingdom of eternal noon. Their citadel was not built of stone or ice, but of captured daylight, its walls appearing as shifting, golden mirages against the stark blue sky. He approached the entrance, a shimmering archway of light, and did the only thing he could think of that might be seen as neither a threat nor a challenge. He laid his axe and knife on the ground. Then he knelt, holding the ember seed out in his open palms, its gentle pulse a stark contrast to the blinding glare around him. For a long, terrifying time, nothing happened. The only sound was the wind whistling through the high crags. He was a supplicant at a silent gate, and the silence felt like a verdict. His mind raced with the consequences of this failure. He would return to find his village buried, his people frozen, and their last hope extinguished because he had traded it for a fool's errand. Just as despair began to tighten its grip, the light at the archway coalesced. A figure stepped through, her form seemingly woven from strands of sunlight and air. Her eyes held no warmth, only the piercing, analytical brightness of a star. She looked at him, then at the seed in his hands, her expression as unreadable as the mountain itself. Her voice, when it came, was like the chiming of crystal, clear and utterly devoid of emotion. You bring a dying ember to the heart of the sun. Explain this, child of the fleeting flame. Her voice was the chiming of crystal, offering no comfort, only a stark choice. The Sunstone, the heart of their citadel's light, was failing. Its slow dimming was a quiet crisis, a fading star at the center of their world. And Kalin, with the unique, raw fire of his lineage, was the only one who could attempt to reignite it. Lyra explained the terrible cost. The ritual was not a gentle sharing. It was a complete channeling, a funneling of his entire inner essence into the stone. He would be pouring the very source of his being into a vessel of alien light. Success would leave him a living conduit, but failure, she warned, would burn him out completely. He would become an empty shell, a man with no fire left in his soul, forever cut off from the magic that defined his people. The choice was a brutal equation. To save his tribe from ice, he had to risk becoming the very thing the Everwinter sought to create, a Firekin without fire. He looked from Lyra's impassive face to the dimming sunstone, a great golden orb that pulsed with a weak, rhythmic light. He thought of Alara and the others making their desperate stand on the plains below, their time running out with the glacier's advance. There was no other path. He knelt before the stone, the warmth of the ember seed against his chest, a small, steady promise in the face of potential oblivion. He did not hesitate. He closed his eyes, reached deep into the core of his being, and grasped the last flickering ember of his own magic. Then he let it go. He poured it all into the stone, every memory of warmth, every spark of defiance, the very heat of his life. It was a torrent of flame rushing into a sun, a sacrifice offered without reservation. For a terrifying moment, he felt nothing but a vast, cold emptiness within himself, a void where his fire had always been. Then, the Sunstone erupted. A wave of pure, golden light exploded outward, so brilliant it washed all color from the world. The citadel hummed with a renewed, deafening power, the very air vibrating with restored energy. Kalin collapsed, his body hitting the smooth, warm floor with a dull thud. He was cold, so profoundly cold. Inside, where a forge had once roared, there was only a single, faint spark, guttering weakly in a vast and hollow darkness. He had not been burned out completely, but what remained was a ghost of what he was. Strong hands, surprisingly solid, helped him to his feet. It was Lyra. Her starlit eyes held a new, faint respect, a glimmer of warmth in their analytical depths. As his vision cleared, he saw the sun whispers moving with a purpose he had not seen before. They gathered tools of solidified light, spears of focused dawn, shields woven from the rays of high noon. Their passive watchfulness was gone, replaced by a readiness for war. They had their light, and now that light was his to command. They descended from the peaks like a river of molten gold. Kaelen led the sun whispers back to his village, just as the outer Palisades groaned under the assault of the first ice constructs. These were not the intelligent golem he had faced before, but mindless extensions of the glacier's will, shambling figures of razor-sharp frost that clawed at the wooden walls. The defenders were falling back, their fire sputtering against the relentless, chilling tide. Then, the air itself seemed to catch fire with a new kind of heat. Beams of solidified sunlight lanced down from the ridge, striking the constructs with the force of 1,000 summer noons. Where the Firekin's flames had been reflected, this concentrated light simply vaporized the ice, leaving behind hissing clouds of steam and puddles of harmless water. A ragged, disbelieving cheer rose from the defenders. The tide had turned in a single, blinding moment, but the Alliance was a fragile, untested thing. The Firekin fought with roaring passion, their magic a wild, untamed blaze. The sun whispers were silent, precise, their attacks choreographed and clinical. A Firekin warrior would unleash a sweeping wall of flame, only for a sun whisper to calmly step through it, unaffected by the heat, but disrupting the flow of the attack. Their magics were two sides of the same coin, warmth and light, but their methods were a language apart. Friction sparked in the glances between them, a silent tension amidst the chaos of battle. Seeing this, Kaelen made a swift decision. He found Lyra amidst the brilliant fray. The Sun Mages are yours to command. I trust your expertise completely. It was a profound act of faith, delegating a portion of his own authority to a near stranger. This freed him to move along the line, shouting encouragement, plugging gaps, and weaving the two disparate forces into a single, cohesive defense. For a few precious hours they held. The initial wave of constructs was shattered, and a tense quiet fell over the battlefield. The defenders allowed themselves a moment of breath, of hope. But that hope was chilled by what they saw on the northern horizon. The main body of the Ice Heart was now fully visible, a crawling mountain of malevolent blue ice that blotted out the sky. Its slow, grinding advance was a promise of absolute finality. This was not a vanguard they had defeated. It was merely the tip of the spear. In the brief respite, Kaelen slipped away from the wall and went to the village center. He knelt by the patch of sacred soil where he had planted his hope. his breath caught. There, defiant against the pervasive cold, was a tiny sprout no larger than his thumbnail. Its single leaf glowed with a soft, determined amber light. It had taken root. The covenant was beginning, but would it awaken in time to face the mountain of ice, now bearing down upon them all? The ice heart did not so much arrive as consume the horizon. It ground to a halt just beyond the village, a cliff of living blue ice that cast the entire settlement into a permanent, chilling twilight. The air grew so cold that sound itself seemed to freeze. In that terrible silence, the Alliance made its stand. The Firekin raised their hands, and the Sun Whispers raised theirs. A dome of shimmering energy bloomed over the village, woven from roaring crimson flame and brilliant, focused sunlight. It was a masterpiece of combined magic, a shelter of defiant warmth against the absolute cold. For a moment, it felt like they had won a reprieve, but the effort was immense. Every magic wielder stood locked in place, their faces tight with strain, as they poured their very life force into maintaining the barrier. This was not a battle of movement, but of endurance, a slow and grueling war of attrition. The ice heart did not need to break through with force alone. It tested their shield with probes of pure, focused cold, spears of absolute zero that struck the dome with a sound like shattering crystal. Each impact sent a spiderweb of fractures rippling across the energy field. A team of defenders would rush to the point of impact, their combined heat and light fusing the cracks shut, but the cost was a tangible drain. Several Firekin collapsed from the strain, their inner fires snuffed out completely, carried away from the lines as the living paid the price for the shield's integrity. Kalin moved among his exhausted people, his own body a hollow vessel. He climbed onto the woodpile in the village square, his voice raw but clear. We are not just fighting for our lives today. We are fighting for the memory of every fire that has ever burned in this land. We fight so that our children will know the warmth of a story, not just the chill of a graveyard. Let our sacrifice be the kindling for their future. With a shout, he lit the pyre. The bonfire roared to life, a towering pillar of flame and defiance. Its light washed over the weary defenders, and for a glorious moment, the dome above glowed brighter, the cracks sealing themselves, the oppressive cold retreating a step. The ice heart responded not with rage, but with a calculated, chilling intelligence. The sky, already dark, grew black. From the glacier's face, a storm was born, a blizzard of dark, crystalline ice that fell not as snow, but as a blanket of pure void. These shards did not melt against the dome. They clung to it, absorbing the light and heat, smothering the bonfire's glow. The dome began to dim, the defenders groaning under the renewed, suffocating pressure. It was a battle they were slowly, inevitably losing. As the unnatural darkness swirled, Lyra's voice cut through the gale, calm and analytical. She pointed a slender finger toward the center of the glacial mass. Look deep within the ice. A faint, rhythmic pulse of darker blue light thrummed, a slow and steady heartbeat in the chest of the frozen Leviathan. That pulsing blue heart was the source of it all. Kaelen knew that shattering their defensive dome was only a matter of time for the glacier. To save his people, he had to strike at that core. He called for volunteers for a mission from which return was a distant, almost impossible dream. A handful of the bravest Sun Whispers and his most steadfast Firekin stepped forward without hesitation. Their plan was a desperate gambit. While the main force held the dome, this small, elite team would use the last of their concentrated sun magic to cut a temporary tunnel directly into the glacier's chest, aiming for the heart. Lyra herself joined them, her light the only thing that could carve a path through such ancient, sentient ice. The moment they breached the outer wall, the world vanished behind a curtain of shifting, reforming blue. The tunnel they had carved sealed itself instantly, the ice groaning as it healed the wound. They were trapped inside the beast. The cold here was different. It was not an absence of heat, but a presence, a sapient malevolence that pressed in on their minds. It did not attack with claws, but with whispers. The air shimmered, and from the walls of ice stepped phantoms woven from their own deepest fears. A Firekin warrior saw the frozen, accusing faces of his children. A sun whisper was confronted by a vision of their citadel, fallen into eternal shadow. For Kalin, it was his father, not as a proud chieftain, but as a broken, weary old man, his voice a rasp of disappointment. The phantoms did not strike. They simply stood, their silent judgment a more effective weapon than any blade. Pushing past these apparitions of regret was a battle that drained their spirits more than any physical fight. Finally, they reached a vast, cavernous chamber. At its center hung the pulsing core, a sphere of dark, solidified cold. But between them and their goal shimmered a final, invisible barrier. It was not a wall of ice, but a field of pure, concentrated despair. Every ounce of hope that approached it was snuffed out, leaving only a hollow ache. Lyra tested it with a lance of pure sunlight, but the light dimmed and died before it touched the core. The shield fed on joy, on warmth, on memory itself. Kaelen understood the terrible price. He could not break this shield with fire or light. He had to burn the very fuel that gave his own spirit warmth. He had to sacrifice his happiest memories. He closed his eyes and reached into the core of who he was. He offered up the memory of his mother's laughter by the hearth. He felt it dissolve into nothing, a part of him forever gone. He gave the memory of his first successful hunt, the pride in his father's eyes. Another piece of his soul turned to ash. With each cherished moment, he willingly burned. The emotional weight of his own life lessened, leaving him feeling hollowed out, a man becoming a ghost of his own past. But the shield of despair flickered. It was working. With a final, agonizing effort, he offered the memory of the Ember-Tree grove, the profound warmth and acceptance he had felt there. The shield shattered with a sound like a million panes of glass breaking at once. The psychic weight lifted, and there, exposed and vulnerable, was the core of the Everwinter. It was not a crystal or a stone. It was a massive, perfectly frozen, and impossibly still-beating heart of a long-forgotten winter god. Kaelen stood before the pulsing heart of winter, a colossal, crystalline organ that beat with a rhythm of absolute zero. This was the source of the endless cold, a thing of terrible, lonely beauty. He raised his hands, and the last of his fire magic, that single guttering spark, flared to life. It was a pathetic flame against such a monument of ice, but it was all he had left to give. Lyra understood his intent instantly. She did not command her people. She simply acted, and they followed. Beams of pure, focused sunlight converged on Kaelen, not to attack, but to envelop him. They wove a corona of incandescent power around his small flame, amplifying it, turning his personal sacrifice into a collective one. Their fates were now inextricably bound to his. If his fire died here, their light would be extinguished with it. The core did not accept this intrusion. It fought back not with constructs or phantoms, but with waves of pure, conceptual cold. This was the chill of the void between stars, the absolute absence of heat and hope. The air around them crystallized, and Kalin felt his amplified flame sputter. The very light of the sun whispers beginning to dim and freeze solid. To fight this cold with more heat was the instinct of a warrior, but Kalin was no longer just a warrior. He was a chieftain who had learned the language of the land. Destroying the core would be a victory of ash, leaving a void that another darkness would fill. He saw it then, not as a monster to be slain, but as a heart that had forgotten how to beat with anything but solitude. In a moment of profound clarity, he made his choice. He did not unleash his power in a final, destructive blast. Instead, he opened himself completely. He let the amplified fire and light flow out of him not as a weapon, but as an offering. He poured every memory of warmth he had sacrificed, every flicker of hope from his people, every golden ray of the sun's grace directly into the core. It was an act of compassion for a force that knew only cold, an attempt to share the very warmth it had spent eons trying to erase. The risk was absolute. He was giving the enemy the power to annihilate them. If the core rejected this gift, the resulting backlash of contradictory energies would not just kill them, it would unmake them, scattering their essence into the frozen winds. For a terrifying, endless moment, nothing happened. The heart of winter simply hung in the silence, absorbing the warmth, a bottomless well drinking a single cup of water. Then, a single, clear drop of water fell from its lowest point, hitting the frozen floor with a chime like a bell. A deep, resonant crack echoed through the chamber, not of shattering ice, but of something long frozen beginning, at last, to awaken. The core of winter did not shatter. It wept. A cascade of clear, warm water began to flow from the ancient heart, washing away the eons of bitter solitude in a gentle, radiant thaw. The deep, groaning thunder that had heralded the glacier's advance fell silent, replaced by the soft, steady music of melting ice. The malevolent intelligence that had guided it, the sentient cold that sought to erase all warmth, simply faded, its purpose dissolved by an act of compassion it could not comprehend. The great wall of ice was no longer a predator. It was just ice again, vast and dormant, already beginning its slow, natural retreat. This salvation, however, brought a new and immediate danger. The sudden, immense melt sent torrents of water rushing down from the glacier's face, threatening to swamp the village and wash away the very soil where their future was taking root. Panic could have easily taken hold again, but Kaelin's voice, though hoarse with exhaustion, was firm. "Do not fight the water," he commanded. "Guide it." His people, their bodies aching and their magic spent, did not hesitate. They took up their tools and worked with a frantic, hopeful energy, digging channels and building earthen berms to steer the flow away from their homes and into the dry riverbeds that had been empty for generations. They were turning a potential disaster into a promise, creating a network of veins that would carry life back to the barren land. In that moment, they understood the true lesson. Destruction had always been the Everwinter's way, and in their desperation, it had nearly become theirs. But by choosing to understand the cold, to offer warmth instead of more fire, They had achieved what force never could. They had not conquered the winter, they had persuaded it to rest. The cost was etched into every weary face and into Kaelin's own hollowed-out spirit, but the reward was a world reborn. As the last of the floodwaters receded, soaking into the thirsty earth, a collective gasp rose from the village. All eyes turned to the center. The tiny ember sapling, which had clung to life as a single, glowing leaf, suddenly surged. Its stem thickened, new branches unfurled with a soft, rustling sound, and a canopy of leaves burst forth, each one pulsing with a steady, confident inner fire. The air around it hummed with a gentle, pervasive warmth that pushed back the lingering chill, not with defiance, but with a quiet, unshakable presence. The covenant was no longer a hope. It was a living, breathing truth, and its light fell upon a people who had finally learned how to truly wield it. The gentle warmth of the Ember-Tree now defined the village, a constant reminder of their victory. In the days following the Great Thaw, the air was filled with the sounds of renewal, the steady rhythm of hammers, and the murmur of shared labor. The Firekin and Sun Whispers worked side by side, no longer as separate armies, but as a single community. They raised new longhouses with walls of timber and interlaced sun-catching crystals that glowed softly by day and stored light for the long nights. Central fire pits were redesigned, their flames reflecting off strategically placed crystal lenses to amplify the heat, creating pockets of summer throughout the settlement. This was not mere reconstruction. It was the birth of a new architecture, a physical manifestation of their fused magic. This blending of cultures extended beyond their buildings. Firekin children learned the precise, meditative patterns of light, weaving from the sun whispers, while the sun mages began to understand the raw, emotional power of a story told by a crackling hearth. Knowledge flowed freely, each group filling the gaps in the other's understanding. The result was a hybrid society, more resilient and inventive than either could have been alone. A cook might use a sliver of focused sunlight to sear meat perfectly, while a weaver could imbue cloth with the enduring warmth of a banked fire. Their survival was no longer a question of mere endurance, but a blossoming of shared potential. Yet this new harmony was not without its dissonant notes. On both sides, traditionalists watched the changes with deep-seated unease. Some elder Firekin grumbled that their wild, passionate magic was being tamed into a polite parlor trick, that the old, fierce songs were being forgotten. Among the Sun Whispers, a faction feared that their pure, analytical light was being contaminated by chaotic emotion, that their ancient disciplines were being diluted for the sake of comfort. They saw not strength in unity, but the slow erosion of everything that made their people distinct. The fear of losing their unique identities was a cold undercurrent beneath the surface warmth. Kaelen and Lyra understood that symbolism could bridge the divide where words failed. During a gathering of the entire united community, they stood together before the Ember-Tree. In a ceremony witnessed by all, Kaelen presented Lyra with a single, perfect ember from their sacred fire, cooled and hardened into a permanent, glowing stone. In return, Lyra gave him a sunstone, a core of solidified daylight that pulsed with a gentle, constant rhythm. This was not a trade of objects, but an exchange of essences. It was a public vow, a permanent alliance that made their new, combined people official. Their survival was now irrevocably intertwined. This union guaranteed their collective future, but it also marked a profound ending. The Firekin, as a people defined solely by their inner flame, were no more. The Sun Whispers, as isolated guardians of pure light, were also a thing of the past. They had become something new, a people of the hearth and the horizon, their fate forged in the heart of a glacier. As the new settlement thrived, its streets alive with the mingled sounds of laughter and chiming light, Kalin felt a familiar restlessness stir within his hollowed chest. He would walk to the edge of the village, his gaze drifting north, beyond the retreating ice, to the vast, uncharted wilderness where other legends and other threats still slept beneath the silent snow. The first festival of the waking sun was born from Kaelin's quiet conviction. Each year, as the sun's return was celebrated, the entire community would gather before the Ember-Tree to hear the full tale of the Ice Heart retold. The children, a blend of fiery lineage and sun-touched descent, did not just listen. They were taught to weave a single, unified strand of magic, a thread of sunlight given the passion of flame. This act of shared remembrance became the bedrock of their new identity, a living promise that the hard-learned lessons of cooperation and sacrifice would never fade. The festival's bonfire roared not with defiance, but with a profound sense of continuity. Yet for Kaelen, standing as the figurehead of this joyous celebration, a deep and personal loneliness echoed in the cheers. He was the last true Firekin chieftain, the final bearer of a title that had become a relic. The weight of his singular history was a quiet burden he carried alone, a chieftain without a pure-blooded tribe to lead. To give purpose to that weight, he began the most important task of his life. He gathered his remaining memories and started writing. He transcribed every old Firekin legend, every fireside song, every fragment of lore he could recall. This was not a eulogy for a people who were gone. It was an offering, the foundational scroll for a new, shared library of history. He knew the stakes were delicate. Preserving the past was vital, but if held too tightly, nostalgia could become an anchor, holding their new culture back from its own unique evolution. He had to honor the flame without letting its ashes blind them to the dawn. One evening, while carefully inking a tale of the northern volcanoes, where the Earth's own fire once danced, his stylus paused. He noticed a curious pattern repeating across different myths, a geographical thread connecting places of immense geothermal power. The old stories spoke of them as separate wonders, but laid out on his map, they formed a distinct, intentional design, a pattern that pointed toward another, long-dormant power, sleeping deep beneath the ice. The new maps of the receded glacier were still crisp and smelling of ink when the scouts brought back their impossible report. They had been charting the freshly exposed terrain, a world of polished stone and deep crevices, when they found it, a yawning entrance into the earth, wide enough to march 10 men abreast into the darkness. But it was the air that stopped them in their tracks. A steady, warm breath flowed from the cavern mouth, carrying the faint, mineral scent of deep earth and something else, something alive. This was no frozen tomb. It was a gateway to a hidden world, warmed by the planet's own beating heart. The promise was immense. Here was a source of geothermal power that could fuel their forges, grow their food in deep earth gardens, and secure their future for generations. Yet as the scouts ventured just a few paces inside, a low, rhythmic hum began to resonate through the very stone beneath their feet. a vibration that set their teeth on edge and their own magic flickering with unease. When Lyra approached the cavern entrance, the reaction was immediate and unsettling. The ambient sunlight that always seemed to cling to her form dimmed, and the crystalline tools at her belt chimed softly, not with their usual clear notes, but with a discordant, wavering frequency. Her analytical composure tightened into sharp focus. "This resonance is not a fire or light," she stated, her voice cutting through the warm, humid air. "It is something older, something that sleeps." Her declaration sent a new kind of chill through the gathered crowd. They had faced the absolute cold of the Everwinter and won. But this was an unknown, a third force that existed outside their hard-won understanding of the world. The warmth was not a comfort, it was a lure. Kaelen listened to the reports with a grim sense of inevitability. He had felt the pattern in the old tales pointing here, to a power sleeping beneath the ice. He would not let fear of the unknown make them prisoners on the surface, nor would he let reckless ambition blind them to the danger. He organized the expedition with a careful balance, a reflection of their new unity. Their strongest fire wielders would provide light and warmth. Their most skilled light weavers would map and analyze the strange energies, and their keenest scouts would ensure they did not become lost in the labyrinth. They were not going to conquer this place. They were going to introduce themselves. The stakes of their descent could not be higher. These caves could be the greatest gift their new world had to offer, a cradle of endless energy that would allow their culture to flourish in ways they had never dreamed. Or they were walking into the den of a slumbering consciousness, an ancient being of pure geothermal force for whom the sentient glacier was merely a surface pest. One misstep, one spark in the wrong place, and they might awaken a rage that could shatter continents. As the team lit their torches and sun orbs, the warm breath from the cave seemed to pull them inward. With each step down the smooth, spiraling passage, the ambient hum grew louder, resolving from a vague vibration into a distinct, rhythmic pattern. It was no longer just a sound. It was a cadence, a deep, resonant pulse that almost sounded like words. The rhythmic pulse solidified into a physical presence deep within the earth. The expedition emerged from the narrow tunnel into a cavern, so vast their combined light could not reach its ceiling. The walls themselves were alive, studded with massive, faceted crystals that glowed with a soft, internal light, each one pulsing in perfect, breathing synchrony with the resonant hum. The air thrummed with a power that was both exhilarating and deeply unsettling. It was like standing inside the chest of a slumbering giant. Then came the first incident. A young Firekin, overwhelmed by the energy, lost focus for a single second. A spark of his uncontrolled magic leapt from his fingertips and struck a nearby crystal. The crystal did not shatter. It absorbed the spark, amplified it 100-fold, and fired it back as a roaring gout of flame that scorched the stone ceiling high above. A moment later, a sun whisper's attempt to analyze the light spectrum resulted in a blinding flash that left spots in everyone's vision for minutes. The crystals were not just resonating with their magic. They were reflecting and magnifying it with chaotic, unpredictable consequences. Navigating the cavern was now a deadly ballet. Every step had to be measured, every flicker of emotion or stray thought carefully controlled, lest it trigger another volatile reaction. A single misstep could start a chain reaction of amplified fire and light that might not stop until the entire crystalline structure and the mountain above it came crashing down. The promise of limitless power had become a trap of their own making. Kaelen watched a shard of crystal glow ominously as a scout's nervous energy passed too close to it. He made the only call he could. He gave the order for a full, immediate, and careful retreat. The potential gain was not worth the risk of annihilation. They had to understand what they were facing before they took another step. Back at the village, the air was thick with a new kind of tension. The warm security of the Ember-Tree felt fragile in the face of this deep earth mystery. Kaelen and Lyra pored over the ancient scrolls, the very ones Kaelen had painstakingly compiled from the fragments of Firekin lore. They were not looking for myths of volcanoes, but for something more specific, something that matched the living, breathing crystals. The answer was not in a grand epic, but in a faded marginal note, a scribe's afterthought beside a tale of the first chieftains. It spoke of the sunken ones, a people who did not wield fire or light, but who learned to weave the song of the earth itself. Their greatest achievement was the forging of the earth heart crystals, not as natural gems, but as crafted batteries, designed to store and regulate the planet's own geothermal breath. The crystals were not a natural wonder. They were the abandoned, still beating heart of a civilization that had vanished long before the first Firekin ever sparked a flame. The implications were staggering. They were not explorers in a wild cavern. They were trespassers in a machine of unimaginable age and complexity. A machine whose controls they did not understand, whose purpose they could only guess at, and whose fail-safes they had almost triggered into catastrophic failure. The scrolls did not speak of a lost civilization, but of a people who had chosen silence. They were the stone singers, architects who wove mountains with melody and carved valleys with vibration. Their final act was not one of creation, but of preservation. Facing a cataclysm that threatened to unmake the world, they performed the ultimate sacrifice. They sang a single, perfect note of stillness, a lullaby that sealed them and their entire culture in a state of suspended animation deep within the planet's heart, leaving their automated crystal constructs to maintain the echo of their great song as a vigil. The hum that had so unsettled the expedition was not a threat. It was a lullaby, a ghost of a chorus, sung by machines for thousands of years, waiting for a world to become safe again. This discovery presented a choice more terrifying than any battle. They could attempt to fully reactivate the network, to wake the sleepers and learn their secrets. But the texts were clear. The cataclysm the stone singers feared was not gone. It was merely dormant, and a wrong note in the grand symphony of their reawakening could trigger it anew, unleashing tectonic fury that would make the ice heart seem like a gentle frost. The power to reshape continents lay within their grasp, but so did the power to break them. After days of tense debate, Kaelen and Lyra reached a consensus born of their hard-won wisdom. They would not be so arrogant as to rouse the sleepers. Instead, they would attempt something more humble and perhaps more dangerous. They would try to speak to the machine itself, to the crystal constructs that had been minding the store for millennia. The goal was a careful, partial activation of a single communication node, a whisper into the ear of the Guardian. The risk was immense. If their combined magic was too crude, too loud, it could be misinterpreted by the ancient systems as the very cataclysm they were designed to withstand. A single misstep would not just destroy them, it would erase the Stone Singers forever, along with every hope of their legacy. Standing before the central crystal in the heart of the cavern, Kaelen and Lyra joined hands. He focused on the steady, enduring warmth of the hearth, a low and constant frequency. She channeled the clear, precise light of the distant stars. Together, they wove a single, thin thread of magic, a trickle of fused energy, and let it flow into the pulsating crystal. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the deep, resonant hum that filled the cavern shifted in pitch. The chaotic, breathing pulse of the crystals smoothed into a steady, attentive tone. The light in the cavern softened, and from the air itself, a single, clear voice spoke, its tone neither mechanical nor entirely organic, but filled with an immeasurable, patient loneliness. It spoke one word, a greeting held in reserve for an unimaginable age. Welcome. The voice echoed not in the air, but in their bones. From the central crystal, light and polished stone flowed together like liquid, coalescing into a form of impossible grace. She was tall, her body a tapestry of shifting minerals and captured starlight, and she named herself G, the last guardian of the Stone Singers. Her voice was the patient rhythm of tectonic plates. She explained that the ones who built this place were not sleeping in any way they could understand. They were in a dreamless, eternal stasis, their great song reduced to this automated hum, a ghost in the machine that kept the very bones of the earth from trembling. Her crystalline gaze fell upon Kaelen and Lyra, and it was not welcoming. It was the wary assessment of a warden who has guarded a tomb for millennia, only to find children playing with fire at the gates. Your magics are chaos, she intoned. A spark of your fire, a flash of your light, and the resonance you felt would become a shriek. The balance my charges died to preserve would be shattered in an instant. Kaelen felt the weight of her judgment, but he also saw the profound loneliness in her vigil. He stepped forward, his own inner emptiness making his offer feel not like a demand, but a humble proposal. He did not ask for the secrets of the Stone Singers. He offered a pact. His people, the people of the hearth and the horizon, would become the new guardians of these depths. They would protect the stasis chambers from any who might seek to exploit or disturb them. In return, they asked only to learn the most basic principles of earth shaping, not to command the mountain, but to better understand the land they called home. The stakes of this decision were immense. To accept would bind their future to the deep places of the world, tying their prosperity to the silent, slumbering fate of an ancient race. It was a responsibility that would span generations, yet the reward was a connection to the world more profound than any they had known, a chance to become not just inhabitants of the land, but its stewards. G considered the offer, her form shimmering as she processed the intention behind his words. Her crystalline eyes, like faceted pools of obsidian, reflected the combined, gentle light of Kaelin's quiet resolve and Lyra's steady brilliance. After a silence that stretched like the age of stone, she extended a hand, her fingers formed of gleaming, polished rock. The alliance was sealed not with a handshake, but with a cord. Deep within the great crystal cavern, Kaelen, Lyra, and G stood at the nexus of the humming stones. Kaelin's palm, though holding only a ghost of its former fire, glowed with the steady warmth of a banked hearth. Lyra's hands were sheathed in a calm, brilliant light. G extended her own hand of polished stone, and as the 3 points of power met above the central crystal, their magics did not clash. They wove together. A single resonant tone filled the chamber, a note of such profound harmony that it felt less like a sound and more like the world itself sighing in relief. It was a pact of stone and flame, a vow written into the very frequencies of the land. The effect was immediate and visible far above. The soil, once stubborn and frost-bitten, seemed to exhale, becoming dark and rich. The air lost its biting edge, settling into a milder, more forgiving climate. It was as if an old wound in the world, a fracture they had never known was there, had finally begun to heal. This visible blessing, however, could not mend the fractures in every heart. Back in the village, a small but vocal faction of older Firekin watched the changes with growing dread. Led by a stubborn elder named Borin, they saw the earth shaping not as a gift, but as a corruption. To them, the wild, passionate fire was the soul of their people, and this new, precise, soulless stone magic was a cage. Their fear curdled into action. One morning, as the community began work on a new series of geothermal drills designed by G's guidance, they found the tools sabotaged. Leather straps were cut, and intricate crystal lenses were smeared with thick mud. The message was clear. This new path was not welcome. Kalin confronted Borin, not with the anger of a chieftain, but with the patience of a teacher who understood the weight of fear. He did not argue in the longhouse. Instead, he led Borin and his followers to the unstable northern slope, where the recent thaw had left the mountain prone to slides. "Do you remember the avalanche of 2 winters past?" Kaelen asked, his voice calm. "The one that buried the old hunting lodge and took 3 lives." He then called upon the new earth shapers. With focused intent, they did not command the mountain, but asked it. They placed their hands on the trembling scree, and a low, soothing hum resonated from their palms. The loose rock and soil seemed to settle, knitting together into a stable, terraced foundation, a permanent bulwark against future collapses. This was not a parlor trick. It was the prevention of a known tragedy. The true test came not from a speech, but from a crisis. Borin's own young grandson, chasing a wild hare, scrambled onto a high ledge of that very slope. The disturbed ground, not yet fully stabilized, gave way beneath his small feet. A cry went up as the boy slid toward a sheer drop. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed the old ways of loss would repeat themselves. But the earth shapers were already moving. With a unified, gentle push of their will, the collapsing ledge softened, the earth flowing like water to cradle the boy and gently deposit him, shaken but safe, back onto solid ground. The silence that followed was broken by the boy's relieved sob. Borin stood frozen, his face a mask of crumbling defiance. He looked from his grandson, dusted with soil but unharmed, to the terrace slope that had just saved a life instead of taking one. The deep-seated fear in his eyes did not vanish, but it was overwritten by a slow, dawning, and grudging respect. He gave a single, sharp nod to Kaelen, his lifelong opposition finally, silently, surrendering to the evidence of his own eyes. This hard-won unity secured their present, but the pact with the deep earth had opened a door to a past far more vast than any of them had ever considered. The Triptych Council was born from necessity, a 3-cornered foundation for a society with 3 distinct hearts. Kaelen represented the enduring warmth of the hearth, Lyra the clear logic of the horizon, and G the deep, patient memory of stone. Every decision now required a weaving of these perspectives, a process that was often slow and deliberate. A debate over where to channel a new stream could take days, as they weighed the needs of cropland against the stability of a hillside and the angle of the sun. Yet the decisions they reached were not merely compromises. They were symphonies of consideration, balanced to nurture the long-term health of both the people and the land they were sworn to protect. This careful stability faced its first true test when the scouts returned from the southern valleys. Their report spoke of shadows that moved with purpose, dark forms gathering at the very edge of their newfound fertility. These were not the familiar beasts of the wild. They were figures that seemed to absorb the light, their edges blurred and indistinct, watching from the tree line. The council chambers hummed with a tension far different from the earth song. Instincts clashed. Some Firekin veterans argued for a show of force, to ring the valley with fire and demand the interlopers show themselves. A few Sun whispers suggested a blinding display of light to scatter them, but G's voice, like grinding stone, counseled patience. "We do not know if they are a blade or a begging bowl," she intoned. To assume the first is to create the second. After a long night of debate, the triptych reached its consensus. They would not meet potential hostility with more of the same. Instead, they would dispatch a single, small envoy, a living embodiment of their unity. This party would include a Firekin to offer warmth, a Sun Whisper to provide clear sight, and an Earth Shaper to demonstrate their connection to the land. Their mission was not to threaten, but to understand. They were to extend an open hand, not a clenched fist. The stakes of this choice were immense. These shadowy figures could be survivors from some other cataclysm, desperate refugees in search of sanctuary. They could be traders from a civilization they never knew existed, bearing wonders or knowledge, or they could be the vanguard of something far darker, scouts for a power that viewed their thriving, tri-cultural society as a threat to be eliminated. A misstep here, a single spark of fear or a flash of arrogance, could ignite a conflict that would consume everything they had built. Under a banner woven from strands of flame, light, and stone, the envoy departed. They moved with purpose across the lush, green valleys, their forms small against the vast, emerging landscape. From the council's vantage, they were a brave and hopeful speck. But as they drew closer to the tree line, the shadows there seemed to deepen. They did not retreat from the envoy's combined light, but instead appeared to drink it, the very air growing dull and quiet around them. The envoy's light seemed to shrink as they neared the tree line, swallowed by the deep, silent gloom. The shadows shifted, and from them stepped figures wrapped in gray, their movements fluid and unnervingly quiet. These were the shadow dancers. Their leader, a woman with eyes like polished slate, did not speak. She simply raised a hand, and the world went mute. The envoy's fire magic sputtered into nothing. Their sun orbs dimmed to faint, cold glass. The earth beneath their feet felt distant and unresponsive, its familiar hum severed. It was not an attack of force, but of absolute negation, a void where magic simply ceased to be. Panic was the natural response, a call to arms to defend their very way of life. But Kalin, watching from the ridge, saw past the terrifying display. He saw a people not advancing, but holding a defensive line. He saw their hollow cheeks and threadbare clothes. He gave the order that shocked his own council: stand down, Do not reignite your flames. Do not summon your light. Let the silence be. Then, against all caution, he walked out alone, his hands open and empty, and invited their chieftain to speak under a flag of truce. The risk was monumental. If their magic could be so easily unraveled, a single wrong word could plunge their entire civilization back into a struggle for survival. This time against an enemy they could not fight with the powers that defined them. Inside the quiet of the meeting tent, the air itself felt thin and brittle. The shadow dancer chieftain stood opposite Kaelen, her form seeming to drink the lamplight. Then slowly, she reached up and pushed back her hood. Her face was sharp and lined with hardship, but her eyes held no malice. They were pools of deep, weary sorrow, the look of someone who has been running from a storm. For so long they have forgotten what calm feels like. Her people were not attackers, but refugees from the light. Nyla's voice was a soft rasp as she explained their photophobia, a physical agony under the brilliant sun, magic, and fiery glow that now defined the Triptych lands. Their prosperity, their very survival, had been an act of unintentional conquest, pushing a whole culture into the desolate margins. Kaelen felt the weight of this revelation settle in his chest, a cold stone of moral complexity. Victory over the ice had not made them masters of this land, only its newest and most oblivious stewards. How do you balance the needs of one people against the suffering of another? Accommodating the shadow dancers meant dimming the very energies that powered their forges, grew their sun-fed crops, and shielded their homes. It was a risk that could unravel the fragile stability they had fought so hard to build. Yet to do nothing was to become a different kind of monster, no better than the unfeeling cold they had defeated. He looked from Nyla's weary face to Lyra's analytical gaze and G's stony patience. He proposed a compromise, not of force, but of shared space. We will weave a sanctuary for you, he offered, a territory within our own, where the light is gentler, where shadows can breathe. It would be a place of dim forests and soft, starlit clearings, sustained by a careful, collective effort. The proposal was a leap of faith for everyone. The Triptych would have to voluntarily dim a part of their hard-won radiance, trusting that this new vulnerability would not be exploited. The shadow dancers, in turn, would have to place their lives in the hands of those whose very presence had been their torment, agreeing to live as close neighbors. After a long, silent assessment, Nyla gave a single, slow nod. She would agree to a trial period, a season of cautious coexistence. As the first Earth Shapers gently depressed a hillside to create a sunken veil, and the Sun Weavers spun canopies of filtered, honeyed light, a new and delicate balance began to form in the heart of the valley. It was a tentative peace, built not on power, but on the profound understanding that no light, no matter how brilliant, should ever cast a permanent shadow on another soul. The first day of construction was a symphony of discord. A Sun Weaver's attempt to create a soft, ambient glow instead flared into a painful, blinding flash that sent several shadow dancers recoiling into the deeper woods. In response, a shadow dancer's effort to weave a cooling shade accidentally snuffed out the central fire pit, plunging the worksite into a cold, lightless void that left the Firekin shivering and disoriented. Their magics were not just different, they were antithetical, each one's existence seemingly negating the other's. Frustration simmered, and the initial optimism began to curdle into muttered blame. It was clear that simply working near each other was not enough. The fundamental languages of their power needed a new, shared vocabulary. Seeing the project teeter on the brink of collapse, the four leaders made a pivotal decision. Kaelen, Lyra, G, and Nyla left their respective councils and moved their personal quarters to the very edge of the construction site. They did not command from a distance. They worked in the mud and the half-light, side by side. When a wall of woven shade collapsed, Kaelen was there not with a roaring flame, but with the gentle, radiant heat of sun-warmed stone to comfort the frustrated builder. When a channel for a light conduit threatened to destabilize the soil, G and a shadow dancer worked in tandem, the earth shapers solidifying the ground, while the dancers wove supportive shadows that absorbed the tremors. They became living bridges, translating intent and mediating disputes, not with decrees, but with shared labor. This daily, gritty collaboration became the crucible for miracles. Forced to understand the essence of each other's power, rather than just its effect, they began to innovate. A Firekin, working closely with a shadow dancer, learned to pull the blinding glare from her flames, creating a hearth that gave off profound warmth, but cast no light, a profound comfort to light-sensitive eyes. In return, a shadow dancer discovered how to weave darkness, not as an absence of heat, but as a blanket that trapped and reflected warmth, creating pockets of cozy shadow that the Firekin found deeply soothing. These were not minor adjustments. They were the birth of hybrid magics that had never before been conceived, practical proofs that their differences could create something entirely new and beneficial for all. The entire future of their intertwined societies rested on this single, shared endeavor. If they could weave this sanctuary into reality, it would stand as permanent, living proof that vastly different peoples could not only coexist but co-create, building a world richer and more resilient than any one culture could achieve alone. But if they failed, if the distrust and accidental harms proved insurmountable, the fragile thread of trust would snap. The triptych would retreat behind its walls of light and warmth. The shadow dancers would vanish back into the desperate margins, and the hope of a truly inclusive society would be extinguished, perhaps forever. On the final day, as the last vine was woven into the living archway of the entrance, the four leaders stood together in the center of the completed sanctuary. They did not perform a grand ritual. They simply stood, their presence a conduit. Kaelen let a gentle warmth radiate from his hands. Lyra softened it with a diffuse, golden luminescence. G hummed a low note that rooted the energies into the very soil, and Nyla wove intricate, velvety shadows throughout, not to dim the light, but to give it texture and depth. Their combined magic swirled together, no longer clashing, but intertwining. The result was not day, nor was it night. It was a perpetual, beautiful twilight, a soft glow that illuminated without glaring and sheltered without smothering, a light that finally, truly, hurt no one. The first festival of four lights was not a command performance, but a spontaneous combustion of joy. It began as a simple gathering in the new sanctuary, a shared meal under the gentle twilight, but it quickly swelled into something far greater. A Firekin, inspired, sent a plume of crimson flame into the air that was instantly woven through with threads of golden sunlight by a sun whisper. An earth shaper hummed, and the ground answered, causing crystalline flowers to bloom around the plaza, their petals shimmering. Then a shadow dancer stepped forward, and with a graceful sweep of her hands, She did not dim the display, but gave it depth, weaving velvety darkness between the lights so that each color burned with a startling, beautiful intensity. This was the new magic, the magic of four peoples creating together. The celebration became an annual spectacle, a living symbol that drew travelers from realms they had only heard of in whispers. Traders from southern empires and storytellers from eastern jungles arrived, their caravans laden with exotic goods and even more exotic tales. They spoke in awe of the miracle of the north, a place where ancient enemies had not merely made peace, but had become a single, brilliant tapestry. Kalin watched it all from a place of quiet honor, his heart filled with a profound, aching fulfillment. He had achieved everything he had set out to do, and more. Yet, in the midst of this vibrant, hybrid society, he carried a unique and solitary weight. He was the last pure-blooded Firekin chieftain. His lineage, once defined by its fierce, undiluted flame, was now a single thread being woven into a much larger, more complex pattern. The very piece he had forged was the very thing that ensured his bloodline would never again stand alone. During the festival's climax, as fireworks of intertwined shadow, light, earth, and fire painted the sky, Kaelen stepped onto the central dais. The crowd fell silent, expecting a speech from their founding leader. He did not speak of the past. Instead, he held aloft his chieftain's torch, its wood darkened by years of smoke and ceremony. Then, he did not pass it to a single successor. He extinguished its flame with a whisper of his fingers and broke the torch into 4 equal pieces. He presented one fragment to a young, innovative Firekin smith, another to a visionary sun weaver, a third to a gifted earth shaper, and the final piece to a wise shadow dancer elder. His rule was over. The future would be guided by a council of equals, a leadership as blended as their magic. This act guaranteed the society's survival, rooting its governance in collective wisdom rather than the solitary strength of one bloodline. But it was also a final, symbolic death for the old ways. The traditions of the lone Firekin chieftain, the solitary guardian of the flame, would now exist only in stories, their rituals evolving into new forms or fading gently into history. As the crowd erupted in a cheer that was itself a mixture of 4 distinct voices becoming one, Kaelen turned and slipped away from the celebrations. He walked through the quiet, lamplit streets, the echoes of joy fading behind him, and made his way to the heart of the village. There, the Ember-Tree stood, no longer a sapling, but a mighty, golden-leaved giant, its branches swaying in a warm breeze of its own creation, a silent witness to the world it had helped to birth. The deep, resonant warmth of the Ember-Tree was a comfort he had not felt since his own hearth fire burned. Alone in its quiet glow, Kaelen closed his eyes and turned his gaze inward. There, in the hollowed space where a roaring forge had once lived, he found it. A single, steady ember pulsed with a soft, golden light. It was the last pure fragment of his birthright, the final, untainted spark of the Firekin. For so long, he had fought to preserve this flame, to keep it from being extinguished by the ice. Now, he understood its true purpose was not to be preserved, but to be given away. His entire life as a chieftain, his desperate quest, his sacrifices, they were never about maintaining the old lineage. They were about preparing the kindling for a new one. He was not the guardian of a dying flame. He was the final catalyst, the last ingredient needed for the transformation to be complete. Letting go of that identity felt like releasing a breath he had held his entire life. The title of last chieftain was not a crown, but a weight, and the time had come to set it down. He reached for that last ember within his soul, not with a command, but with a profound sense of gratitude. He did not push his magic into the tree to make it stronger. Instead, he offered it as a final thank you, a completion of the covenant he had begun with his blood and his hope in this very spot. He channeled the gentle warmth back into the tree's roots, a quiet surge of recognition and release. As the last of his personal fire flowed out of him, he felt it not as a loss, but as a homecoming. The ember within him winked out, and the direct, unbroken line of Firekin magic ended with a peaceful sigh. Yet he felt no cold. He felt only connection. The warmth was not gone from the world. It was now part of the air, the soil, the very laughter of the children playing in the streets. His people were no longer just Firekin, but they carried the spirit of its warmth in everything they built. His legacy was not a solitary torch, but the enduring sunrise on a world he helped to wake. The sky above the great square was a living canvas of impossible colors. Ribbons of crimson flame danced with threads of solidified sunlight, while crystalline flowers bloomed from the earth itself, their petals humming with a low, resonant song. Through this tapestry, the shadow dancers wove strands of pure, velvety darkness, giving the brilliant display a profound depth that made the light seem to sing. It was the first true solstice of the new age, and the air itself vibrated with the joy of four peoples becoming one. Kalin stood at the center of it all, a quiet figure amidst the roaring celebration. He watched the faces of the children, a young boy with starlight in his hair, trying to catch a flicker of earth-born crystal, a girl with eyes like polished shadow, laughing as a wisp of gentle flame danced around her fingers. They were the living proof of everything they had fought for. He stepped forward, and a hush fell, not of command, but of deep respect. His voice, when it came, carried not over the crowd, but through it, a low and steady warmth. We believed for so long that to survive was to protect a flame from the wind. He began, his gaze sweeping over the united faces. We built walls around our traditions, fearing that any breath from the outside would snuff us out. But a flame, kept in a sealed jar, will consume itself. It was only when we opened ourselves, when we let the wind feed us and learned to burn with other fuels, that we discovered what fire was truly meant to be. He was not speaking of loss. He was speaking of a fundamental change in understanding. From a leather cord around his neck, he lifted the ancient Firekin amulet. It was a simple, heavy piece of carved obsidian, worn smooth by the touch of countless chieftains before him. It had been a symbol of solitary authority, of a bloodline that stood alone. He held it aloft so all could see. "This does not represent our past," he said, his voice gaining a resonant power. "It represents a single note in a song that was always meant to be a chorus." And with that, he brought his hands together in a single, sharp motion. The obsidian amulet shattered, but it did not explode into dust. The fragments, each one now glowing with a soft, internal golden light, hung in the air for a breathtaking moment, like a constellation of captured embers. Then they flew outward, not randomly, but with a gentle, deliberate grace, arcing over the crowd to land in the open, upturned palms of children from every bloodline. A young earth shaper gasped as a glowing shard settled into her hand, its warmth feeling like a long-lost friend. A boy born of Sun Whisper parents stared in wonder as the light from the fragment pulsed in time with his own heartbeat. A little shadow dancer who had always shied from bright heat felt no burn, only a comforting, gentle warmth that seemed to welcome the dark. In that single, silent act, the old idea of purity was irrevocably broken. The legacy of the Firekin was not ended. It was multiplied. Its essence was no longer confined to a single bloodline, but was now a gift shared with the future, a seed of enduring warmth planted in the hearts of the new generation. The strength of their world would never again depend on one people, one magic, one solitary flame standing against the dark. Its foundation was now this radiant, unbreakable, and beautifully intertwined whole. Kaelen never built a monument to his own name. Instead, he built a library of voices. In the quiet years that followed the Great Unification, he became the keeper of the first tales, a storyteller whose greatest magic was not fire, but memory. He would sit beneath the sprawling canopy of the Ember-Tree, surrounded by children whose bloodlines were a beautiful, tangled mix of all four peoples. He did not tell them just of the Firekin's final, desperate struggle. He told them of the Sun Whisper's patient logic, of the Stone Singer's deep and dreaming vigil, and of the Shadow Dancer's quiet resilience. In his hands, the legends were no longer stories of a dying people, but the origin myths of their own vibrant existence. The children learned that their ability to make a crystal flower bloom from stone was a verse from an ancient earth song, and that their friend's talent for weaving comforting shade was a gift born from a great journey of survival. Difference was no longer a border to be defended, but the very source of their collective strength. The North itself transformed into a living testament to this principle. Magic was no longer a set of rigid, divided disciplines. It was a spectrum, a boundless palette of possibilities. You could walk through a market and see a baker using a gentle, focused beam of sunlight to perfectly glaze pastries right next to a blacksmith who cooled a newly forged blade in a shadow that hardened the metal without making it brittle. A healer might combine the enduring warmth of a hearthstone with the precise light of a sun lens to mend a broken bone. The old fears of dilution and loss faded, replaced by the exhilarating reality of innovation and synergy. The legacy of the Firekin was not erased. It was amplified, its essential spark of warmth and defiance now burning in 1,000 different ways, in 1,000,000 different hearts. The last fires of the North did not gutter out in the snow. They became the everlasting dawn of a civilization that learned the most profound magic of all, that the end of one story is often the brilliant, necessary beginning of the next.